Disclaimer: this story is a fictionalized account inspired by true events. Names and details have been changed to protect privacy. It explores sensitive themes of infidelity and emotional pain, which may be difficult for some readers. We were alone. Just the two of us, wrapped up in the quiet intimacy of a weekend away from the chaos of daily life. The world outside felt distant, and in those moments, it was just us. The soft hum of the city faded into a comforting silence, broken only by the occasional clink of glasses and the faint rustle of the breeze through the open balcony doors. Everything felt perfect, or at least it did on the surface. We had been together for 5 years, long enough to build a life, share dreams, and create memories that felt unbreakable. People around us admired our relationship. We were that couple who seemed to have it all figured out. Friends often joked that we were meant to be, and honestly, deep down, I believed it too. Our lives were intertwined in a way that felt natural, from the morning coffee rituals to late-night talks that stretched into dawn. But something about this particular weekend felt different. Maybe it was the stillness, or the fact that we had intentionally isolated ourselves from the usual distractions. It was supposed to be a time to reconnect, to escape the stress of work and daily demands, and just be with each other. Yet, beneath the calm surface, there were small cracks, tiny fissures in our foundation that I hadn't noticed before. I caught him glancing at his phone a little too often, eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. The smiles didn't always reach his eyes anymore, and the comfortable silences felt heavier than before. I convinced myself it was just stress, maybe work worries or fatigue catching up to him. I wanted to believe in us, to believe that these were just minor hiccups. We talked about our future plans, trips we wanted to take, places we dreamed of living, the possibility of starting a family. It was a script we both knew well, rehearsed and perfect. But even in those conversations, I sensed a hesitation. Like he was holding something back, something he wasn't ready to say aloud. I found myself watching him more closely than usual, searching for clues in the way he moved, the words he chose. There was a distance creeping in, invisible but undeniable. And yet, I clung to the idea that love was enough to keep us safe, that the bond we had forged over the years would protect us from anything. Little did I know that the isolation we sought to deepen our connection would instead become the backdrop to a revelation that would change everything. The quiet was not the peace I thought it was. It was the calm before the storm, a storm that would shatter the perfect image of our relationship and force me to face a painful truth. We were alone. And everything was about to change. The weekend was unfolding just as we had planned, quiet, simple, and filled with the promise of rekindling what felt like a drifting connection. But beneath that promise, a tension was building that neither of us could ignore any longer. The subtle signs I had been noticing finally came into sharp focus on that night, the night everything changed. We had spent the day wandering through the city, sharing laughs and stolen kisses, as if trying to recapture some of the magic from the early days of our relationship. That evening, back at the apartment, we settled in for a quiet dinner. The soft glow of candlelight flickered between us, but the warmth I hoped it would bring was missing. Instead, the air felt thick with unsaid words and uneasy silences. He was scrolling through his phone more than usual, his face tense in the dim light. At first, I told myself to trust him, that I was being paranoid. But my gut twisted into knots, and an unshakable feeling crept in, something was wrong. Then, almost accidentally, I caught a glimpse of a message that wasn't meant for me. It wasn't a one-word text or a silly meme, it was a confession. A whispered secret exchanged between him and someone else, words that broke my heart even in their silence. I felt my chest tighten, the room spinning as the realization hit me like a wave crashing against rocks. He wasn't just distant or tired. He was hiding something far worse. I tried to pull myself together, to breathe through the shock. But when I finally confronted him, asking what the message meant, his carefully constructed world began to crumble. His eyes darted away, words stumbled, and denial fell away like a thin mask. The truth came spilling out, late-night meetings, stolen moments, lies carefully crafted to keep the secret safe. The person I thought I knew was suddenly a stranger, someone who had betrayed not just me, but the trust and love we had built together. In that small apartment, alone with the man I loved and the truth I never wanted to hear, the foundation of everything began to crack. The silence was replaced by raw emotion, anger, confusion, pain, all swirling in a storm I wasn't prepared to face. I felt utterly alone, despite being right there beside him. The betrayal wasn't just about the infidelity itself, but the fact that it had been hidden from me, creeping in unnoticed until it exploded into our lives. That night changed everything. The safe space we had created for ourselves became a prison of secrets and lies. And as I sat there, grappling with the magnitude of what I had discovered, I realized that from this moment forward, nothing would ever be the same. We were alone, yes, but now that loneliness carried a weight I had never imagined. The future I had envisioned shattered, replaced by a painful uncertainty. Trust, once unbreakable, lay in ruins. And in the quiet aftermath of that night, I knew I had to decide what came next. The shock of that night lingered like a heavy fog over the following days. I couldn't escape the images, the words, the truth that had been shoved into my heart. The discovery of his betrayal wasn't a singular moment anymore, it had spread, revealing more cracks beneath the surface than I had ever imagined. In the beginning, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment born from loneliness or confusion. But the more I looked, the clearer the picture became. Text messages hidden in deleted folders, secret calls at odd hours, sudden changes in routine that didn't make sense. Each new detail was a sting, a reminder that he had been living a double life. I remember the moment I found the photo, one that wasn't meant for me, yet it ended up in my hands. It was him, smiling with someone else, someone who wasn't me. The image was small, but it carried the weight of 1,000 broken promises. I felt my breath catch in my throat, the cold realization that his betrayal wasn't just emotional, but had physical proof. The loneliness I felt deepened. It wasn't just the physical space between us anymore, but an emotional chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. I was alone in a house that once felt like home, surrounded by memories that suddenly felt like lies. Every room echoed with the absence of trust, and I found myself questioning everything, every moment, every word, every gesture. It wasn't just the act of infidelity that hurt me most, but the secrecy, the deliberate hiding of his actions and feelings. I kept replaying our conversations, searching for signs I might have missed, wondering how I had been so blind. Was I naive? Was I too trusting? The questions swirled endlessly in my mind, but none brought comfort. I confronted him again, this time armed with undeniable proof. His defenses fell away faster than before, replaced by regret, guilt, and apologies that felt hollow in the face of the damage done. He begged for forgiveness, for a chance to make things right, but I wasn't sure if I could ever see him the same way again. That discovery marked the point of no return. I realized that the man I loved and trusted had made choices that changed the course of our lives forever. The betrayal wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was a fracture in the foundation of our relationship, one that I wasn't sure could be repaired. In the silence that followed, I grappled with what it meant to be truly alone, not just physically, but emotionally abandoned by someone I had trusted with my heart. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with pain, anger, and heartbreak. But it was a journey I knew I had to take to find the truth within myself and decide whether love could survive such a profound betrayal. The air was thick with tension as I faced him again, this time with the undeniable proof clutched in my hands. The moment I showed him the messages, the photos, the evidence of his betrayal, I expected an immediate confession or at least some flicker of remorse. But what I encountered was something far more painful: denial. He looked at me, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and guilt, but his lips formed words that shattered me in a different way. "It's not what you think," he said, voice trembling but resolute. "It's complicated. You don't understand." For a brief moment, I was caught in the storm of confusion, wondering if I was misinterpreting everything, if maybe I had jumped to conclusions. But deep down, I knew the truth. The half-truths and deflections he threw at me were only a desperate attempt to protect himself from the fallout. I demanded answers, but all I received were evasions and broken promises to explain later. The confrontation, which I hoped would bring clarity, instead opened new wounds. His denial wasn't just about protecting his secret, it was about preserving a version of our relationship that was already fractured. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the man I loved and the man who had betrayed me wrestling within. That internal struggle made the pain even more unbearable. I was not only hurt by his actions but also by the fact that he couldn't fully own up to them. Anger rose inside me like a tidal wave. How could he deny something so obvious? How could he expect me to accept vague excuses and empty reassurances? I shouted, pleaded, and demanded the truth, but the silence between us grew louder. The house, once a sanctuary, felt like a battlefield. Every room echoed with unspoken accusations and shattered trust. Our conversations, once full of laughter and hope, became heated arguments filled with bitterness and pain. The weight of his denial made me question not only his love for me but also the future we had imagined together. Despite the chaos, a small part of me clung to hope that beneath the lies and denial, there was still a spark of the man I fell in love with. But I also realized that hope alone couldn't heal this wound. That night, I lay awake, grappling with the harsh reality. The man beside me was both a stranger and someone I desperately wanted to understand. The confrontation had brought pain and confusion, but it also marked a turning point. I had to decide whether to hold on to a broken trust or to start rebuilding my life without him. We were alone, surrounded by silence and secrets. And in that loneliness, I faced the hardest question of all: could love survive the weight of denial? After the confrontation, a heavy silence settled between us, thicker than any argument or accusation. We were alone, not just physically but emotionally disconnected in a way that felt unbearable. The loneliness was suffocating. I was surrounded by the person I loved and yet felt more isolated than I ever had. In the quiet that followed, I was left with nothing but my thoughts and the crushing weight of betrayal. I began to retreat into myself, trying to understand what had happened, why it had happened, and most importantly, what it meant for me. The self-reflection was painful and raw. I questioned everything: my worth, my judgment, and the foundation of our relationship. Was I not enough? Had I missed the signs? These questions swirled endlessly in my mind, feeding a growing sense of insecurity and doubt. The person I trusted most had chosen someone else, and it felt like a personal rejection that cut deep into my soul. The isolation wasn't just about feeling alone, it was about feeling invisible. I was there, living with him, sharing space, but the emotional distance was vast. I found myself craving connection, understanding, and honesty, but those things seemed out of reach. Every glance, every word felt guarded, as if we were both prisoners of this new, fragile state between us. In this solitude, I also began to reflect on my own needs and desires. What did I want from this relationship? Could I forgive? Could I move past this? Or was this the beginning of the end? The questions were terrifying because the answers would change everything. I realized that the pain of betrayal wasn't just about him, it was about me, too. About how I saw myself and my capacity to heal. It forced me to confront my vulnerabilities, my fears of abandonment, and the deep-seated need for trust and security. Amid the heartache, a small spark of clarity began to form. Maybe this isolation was necessary, a space to rebuild, to find strength within myself before I could face what came next. I needed to rediscover who I was outside of the relationship, to understand my own worth independent of his actions. The days felt long and lonely, but in that solitude, I found a strange kind of freedom. Freedom to think, to feel, to grieve. It was the first step toward healing, even though I wasn't sure where the path would lead. We were alone, yes, but in that aloneness, I was beginning to reclaim myself. The days stretched on, each one heavy with uncertainty. After the shock, the confrontation, and the isolation, I was finally faced with the most daunting part of all. What now? The betrayal had shattered everything I thought I knew about us, and I was left standing at a crossroads. I wrestled with the decision to forgive or to let go. Both options seemed painful in their own way. Forgiving felt like an act of bravery, a way to reclaim what we once had and to rebuild trust from the ashes. But it also meant opening the door to vulnerability again, risking heartbreak all over. Letting go, on the other hand, promised relief from the constant pain of suspicion and doubt, but it also meant saying goodbye to years of shared memories, to the person I once believed was my partner for life. We tried to talk, though each conversation was weighed down by fear and raw emotion. He expressed remorse and a willingness to make amends, promising to be transparent and patient. I wanted to believe him, to find a path forward, but the hurt was too fresh, and the wounds too deep. Trust wasn't something that could be fixed with words alone. I sought advice from friends and family, but everyone's opinions varied. Some urged me to move on, others encouraged me to fight for the relationship. Their voices echoed in my mind, but ultimately, the choice was mine. It had to come from within. In quiet moments, I reflected on what I wanted from life, from love, and from myself. Did I deserve to stay in a relationship shadowed by betrayal? Could I ever trust him again? Could we rebuild, or were we just prolonging inevitable heartbreak? I realized that whatever decision I made, it would define not just our future but who I was as a person. It was about self-respect and courage, about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. The weight of this decision was crushing, but it also gave me a strange sense of control. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt I was steering my own path. We were alone in this moment of reckoning. Alone, but empowered because now, I was choosing what came next. The decision had been made, though not easily. We agreed to try, to give our fractured relationship a chance to heal. It wasn't a sudden, magical fix, it was slow, painstaking work that demanded honesty, patience, and vulnerability from both of us. We began couples therapy, sitting in uncomfortable silence at first, facing the raw emotions we had long suppressed. Each session peeled back layers of pain and resentment, revealing not just his betrayal, but also the cracks that had existed long before. We learned to listen without judgment, to express our fears and hopes honestly, and to rebuild a foundation grounded in transparency. There were moments of progress, small victories when he chose openness over secrecy, when I allowed myself to trust, even if just for a moment. But there were also setbacks, tears, and doubts. The wounds were deep, and healing was far from linear. Sometimes, the past haunted us like a ghost, threatening to undo everything we worked for. Old habits died hard, and forgiveness was a daily choice, not a one-time decision. I had to confront my own pain and learn to let go of anger to move forward. At the same time, we rediscovered parts of each other, the reasons we fell in love in the first place. Those moments reminded us that beneath the hurt, there was still a connection worth fighting for. However, the journey wasn't the same for both of us. While I was learning to rebuild trust, he was coming to terms with the consequences of his actions. Our relationship shifted from being about us as a couple to about individuals committed to healing, whether together or apart. And in the quiet moments, I had to ask myself the hardest question: was this enough? Could we truly move past the betrayal, or were we just delaying an inevitable goodbye? The future was uncertain. But one thing was clear: whether we stayed or separated, the experience changed us forever. We were alone, but no longer helpless. We were survivors, learning to navigate the broken pieces and find hope in the possibility of new beginnings. Months passed since that fateful weekend when everything shifted between us. The silence that once felt suffocating slowly softened, replaced by a cautious, fragile peace. We were still alone, but no longer defined by the shadows of betrayal. Instead, we were learning to live with the changes, either together or apart. For me, life after the infidelity was a journey of rediscovery. I learned that being alone didn't always mean loneliness. Sometimes it meant freedom to heal, grow, and rebuild from within. I reclaimed parts of myself that had been lost in the pain: my confidence, my voice, and my dreams. If we chose to stay together, it wasn't because the past disappeared, but because we chose to face the future honestly. Healing was ongoing, and trust had to be earned every day. We celebrated small victories and accepted the setbacks. Our love was no longer perfect, but it was real and resilient. If we parted ways, it was with respect and acceptance, understanding that sometimes love isn't enough to erase the wounds. The end was painful but necessary, a step toward new beginnings for both of us. What remained constant was the lesson that infidelity changes everything. It strips away illusions and forces us to confront the raw truths of human relationships, the fragility of trust, the complexity of forgiveness, and the strength it takes to move forward. We were alone, yes, but in that solitude, we found clarity and courage. Our lives would never be the same, but neither would our capacity to love and heal. And that truth, painful as it was, became the foundation of everything that came next. 7.